Welcome to our exploration of one of the most fascinating figures of 17th-century England, Jeffrey Hudson, famously known as the Queen's Dwarf. In today's video, we'll uncover his extraordinary journey from a childhood marked by a mysterious condition to life in the royal courts, where he captured the attention of Queen Henrietta Maria, and beyond. Through feats of bravery, scandalous duels, and shocking twists of fate, Jeffrey Hudson left an indelible mark on his era. Join us as we dive into the captivating highs and devastating lows of the man who truly helped define the 17th century. 1. Childhood. Jeffrey Hudson's birth in the early 1600s occurred during a remarkable period in English history. This was the twilight of Elizabeth I's reign and the dawn of the Stuart dynasty, a time when religious tensions simmered beneath the surface, scientific and medical knowledge remained extremely limited, and superstition often took the place of empirical evidence. For a child who stopped growing at around 18 inches, approximately 45 centimeters, the social stigma would have been profound. Indeed, physical anomalies of any kind often became the subject of gossip, rumor, and sometimes outright exploitation. In early modern England, communities often turned to folklore to explain peculiar or unnatural events. The rumor that Jeffrey's mother had choked on a pickle while pregnant, thus causing her child's stunted growth, embodies this era's fascination with bizarre, superstitious explanations. We now know that dwarfishness can stem from multiple genetic or endocrine conditions, including forms of congenital dwarfism or, as is suspected with Hudson, a pituitary gland disorder causing growth hormone deficiency. Yet 17th-century medical practitioners did not possess the knowledge or tools we have today, so ill-informed theories about choking on pickles or even curses and witchcraft circulated freely. For the Hudson family, living in rural or small-town England, raising a child so drastically different from his siblings would have posed profound challenges. Neighbors might have spread rumors that the family was cursed or that the child's small stature was a sign of moral failing. Jeffrey's parents, with limited resources, could not possibly guess that this tiny boy would one day stand in the presence of kings and queens, embroiled in political drama at the highest level. It is also important to remember that children in the 17th century faced high mortality rates. Issues like malnutrition, plague, smallpox, and other diseases commonly carried off the young before they could reach adulthood. Jeffrey Hudson's survival, despite what may have been a serious medical condition, suggests both resilience and perhaps a stroke of good fortune that would follow him, at least in his early years, into the Duke of Buckingham's household. These early years of Hudson's life, overshadowed by curiosity and misconceptions about his size, formed the prelude to an era of greater challenges and unimaginable adventures. No one, least of all his family, could have known that this child of such modest origins, physically distinctive and financially vulnerable, would someday shape court entertainments, cross national borders in perilous journeys, and even hold an official rank in the midst of a civil war. 2. Family. Jeffrey Hudson's father worked as a trainer of baiting bulls for the Duke of Buckingham, one of the most influential noblemen in 17th-century England. The Duke of Buckingham, likely George Villiers, 1st Duke of Buckingham, was a favorite of King James I and later Charles I. He held massive estates, wielded enormous power, and had the means to indulge in extravagant amusements. This background is vital to understanding how Jeffrey Hudson's family found themselves in a position where they could give him up to the Duke and Duchess. It was not uncommon for powerful aristocrats to view unusual individuals, whether dwarfs, giants, or others with distinctive physical conditions, as curiosities or living rarities. Some were collected for entertainment or to showcase at lavish dinners, akin to how one might show off rare artwork or exotic animals. In an era lacking modern ethical frameworks, such practices were woven into the social fabric of courtly life. Jeffrey Hudson's father, despite having a job connected to the Duke, likely earned a modest wage. The practice of bull baiting itself was a controversial blood sport, popular among the English nobility, which involved pitting dogs against tethered bulls. It drew spectators from various social backgrounds. For the Hudson family, at the lower end of the socio-economic scale, the offer or suggestion that Geoffrey become part of the Duke's household might have seemed like both a shocking and golden opportunity. For them, life was a daily struggle; for the Duke, it was an amusement or a novelty. The exact nature of Hudson's transfer to the Duke and Duchess's care remains ambiguous. We don't know if money changed hands or if the arrangement was more of a patronage deal. It is possible that the Duke promised to clothe, feed, and house Geoffrey, while potentially offering the Hudson family some form of financial assistance or simply relief from the burden of caring for a child with special needs. Records of these deals are scarce and typically filtered through diaries, letters, or second-hand accounts. However, the phrase "rarity of nature" appears in multiple narratives, emphasizing that Geoffrey was considered exceptionally unique because of his miniature, perfectly proportioned build. This was not an uncommon sentiment at the time. Dwarfs who were proportionate, sometimes called true dwarfs, in archaic medical parlance, attracted more attention than those who displayed other forms of disproportionate dwarfism. From a modern standpoint, it's easy to judge the Hudson family for relinquishing their son. Yet 17th-century realities were harsh. Many children from impoverished backgrounds ended up apprenticed to tradespeople or given away to wealthier families if the parents couldn't afford to raise them. In this extreme case, the Duke's interest in collecting a dwarf child probably seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime chance for Geoffrey to escape poverty, possibly even leading to a better life than he might otherwise expect. The emotional weight of such a decision, both on the parents and on 7-year-old Geoffrey, cannot be overstated, even if we lack detailed records of how they felt. Ultimately, this action placed Jeffrey Hudson on a trajectory that would lead to the royal court. Without this turning point, he might have lived out a short, uneventful life in poverty, overshadowed by his condition. Instead, he found himself thrust into a world of court intrigue, extravagance, and, at times, perilous adventure. 3. Career. Early court life. While people in 17th-century England didn't necessarily know the cause of dwarfism, several little people lived among the English at this time. However, Hudson was extremely proportionate, which made him quite special. This trait became his ticket out of poverty. Hudson's time with the Duke and Duchess is mostly shrouded in mystery. It seems that, at the time, wealthy people could simply collect unusual individuals, much like they might collect jewelry or rare art. Either way, he likely experienced a more comfortable life with them, until they found just the right way to put his size to good use. After just a few months of living with the Duke and Duchess, Hudson's real shining moment arrived during a royal visit. His caretakers threw an elaborate dinner to honor the English royals, King Charles I and his new wife, Queen Henrietta Maria. They ordered their cooks to create a huge pie, tucked Hudson into it, and presented it to the Queen as dessert. When Hudson emerged fully dressed in armor, parading up and down the table with a flag, the Queen was delighted. Even better, the Duke and Duchess offered him as a gift, so she took him back to the castle. Thus began Hudson's life in the royal courts. Life in the Queen's court. In some ways, Hudson became just another little trinket to the Queen. Reportedly, she'd already amassed an array of rarities in her court, including a few other little people, a monkey, and a porter who stood over 7 feet tall. But Hudson didn't spend his days just collecting dust. He formed a close bond with the 7-foot-tall Welshman William Evans. They grew so close that Evans sometimes walked the streets with Hudson in his pocket. This even led to an entertaining act in which Evans mimed making a sandwich by pulling both a loaf of bread and Hudson from his pocket. Hudson also appeared in special shows at court, involving music, performance, and design to entertain the royals. As a member of the Queen's circle, he received an academic education and training in proper manners, went hunting, enjoyed good food, and even had his own servant. He also joined the royals on horseback rides. While the Queen and her ladies rode side saddle, Hudson had a custom saddle made just for him, decked out with velvet and silk. The Queen became very fond of him, taking him along on several trips. She even dressed him in the same fabrics she used for her own children. Brushes with danger. At about age 10, Hudson joined a group traveling to France to secure a midwife for the then pregnant queen. Although they reached France safely, their return trip was harrowing. Pirates commandeered their ship. Fortunately for Hudson, they simply raided the ship and let them continue to England. In 1637, around 18 years old, Hudson joined another group crossing the English Channel to see some dangerous entertainment in the Netherlands, where the Dutch overtook the Spanish in the siege of Breda. He escaped unscathed, but soon enough, England became more perilous than life at sea. The English Civil War and military service in 1642, war broke out in England between supporters of the king and those who wanted to end his reign. The Queen fled to the Netherlands, taking Hudson and other members of court with her, successfully raising funds to help the king. But on their return trip, they stopped in Yorkshire and woke early the next morning to the sound of cannonballs from the king's enemies. Surprisingly, Hudson leaped from his bed, weapons in hand, prepared to defend the Queen. Luckily for him, his adversaries never left their ships. However, the next time he found himself under siege, his enemies did come ashore. Now in his early 20s, Hudson apparently managed to prove his valor in some manner, though the details are unclear. Sometime after these confrontations, the Queen bestowed on him the title, Captain of Horse. He took this seriously, going by Captain Jeffrey Hudson for the rest of his life. Even so, as unrest continued, the Queen ended up fleeing to France with her court. In France, Hudson grew dissatisfied with his status, not wanting to be seen merely as the Queen's pet. He wanted respect as an adult and as a captain. Unfortunately, that desire would become his undoing. For scandal duels in the 17th century duels were more than just private fights, they were ritualized expressions of honor. In France, Cardinal Richelieu and King Louis XIII had imposed strict laws against dueling due to the high mortality rates among the nobility. England, too, frowned upon them, though the practice persisted. By the mid-17th century, a duel gone wrong could lead to serious legal consequences, including execution, if the offending party was found guilty of murder. Charles Croft's mockery. The precise nature of Croft's offense is lost to history, but it's clear he insulted or belittled Hudson. Perhaps Croft questioned Hudson's manhood, scorned his Captain of Horse title, or simply mocked his height. Whatever the reason, Hudson's sense of dignity and his newly embraced identity as a military officer left him no choice, by the codes of honor then prevailing, but to challenge Croft. Tragedy of the duel. Croft's choice to bring a toy water gun indicates that he expected a comedic, symbolic confrontation, not a life-threatening event. Duels often included a protocol where one or both parties could choose to fire in the air or deliberately miss, signaling reconciliation. However, Hudson, determined to be taken seriously, responded lethally. The single shot that ended Croft's life was a stark demonstration that behind the comedic exterior lay a man who felt deeply about his honor. Legal consequences and the Queen's intervention. French authorities, already intolerant of dueling, acted swiftly. Croft's social standing, being related to an English baron, compounded the scandal. Had Queen Henrietta Maria not intervened, Hudson almost certainly would have faced execution. Her personal pleas, coupled with her status as the daughter of King Henry IV of France, carried enough weight that the authorities commuted Hudson's sentence to banishment. This outcome was rare, especially for homicide in a duel, illustrating the Queen's lingering affection and her influence in her homeland. Return to England. Hudson's forced return to England was anything but a triumphal homecoming. He arrived in a kingdom still ravaged by civil war. The execution of King Charles I, which would happen in 1649, loomed. Having lost the Queen's immediate protection, Hudson found himself in an uncertain position, no longer the beloved court dwarf but a man with a tarnished reputation and no stable patron. This turning point demonstrated how drastically fortunes could change for a court favorite. One moment, Hudson enjoyed privileges in the Queen's inner circle, the next, an impulsive act in the name of honor left him exiled. Still, the greatest trials of his life were yet to come. 5. marriage. Little is known about Jeffrey Hudson's personal, romantic life. The scant historical records do not reference any marriage or offspring. Among dwarfs in early modern courts, marriages were not unheard of. Some dwarfs married either other dwarfs or average-sized partners. However, no direct evidence suggests that Hudson found a spouse. Given the chaotic nature of his life, war, exile, slavery, it's hardly surprising that a stable domestic arrangement never surfaces in existing records. While some courtiers might have attempted to arrange marriages for their dwarfs as part of further spectacle or breeding rarities, in a disturbingly casual attitude that occasionally arose, it appears no such arrangement befell Hudson. His life was a succession of crises, voyages, and personal upheavals, leaving little room or time for typical family pursuits. 6. Other relationships. One of Hudson's most notable relationships was his friendship with the 7-foot-tall William Evans. They developed a humorous act where Evans would pull Hudson from his pocket alongside a loaf of bread, pretending to make a sandwich. Despite its ridiculousness, this act suggests the pair genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Hudson also had a close bond with Queen Henrietta Maria. She brought him into her court, provided him with luxuries, an education, and her favor. Even after the duel in which Hudson killed Charles Croft, the Queen intervened to spare his life, indicating she still held him in high regard. 7. Death. As we move into the final chapter of Jeffrey Hudson's remarkable life, we enter a period filled with bitterness and heartbreak, where a one-time court favorite who had traveled the seas and fought alongside royalty found himself cast adrift in a kingdom that hardly recognized him anymore. To appreciate the depth of his misfortunes, we must remember not only the bold adventures that preceded these moments but also the precarious nature of 17th-century England, where political climates shifted as swiftly as the English weather. Hudson's years of captivity under Ottoman pirates in North Africa rank among the most harrowing experiences of his entire life. Unlike his earlier skirmishes with pirates, incidents that ended with mere ship raids, this time he was forcibly taken ashore and remained enslaved for an astonishing 25 years. During this prolonged ordeal, he faced the daily grind of forced labor and the brutality one would expect in such circumstances. We have only scant details on how he survived those years, but a few key points stand out. First, Hudson later claimed that in the course of this captivity, he somehow grew to nearly 4 feet tall. Medical experts today might question whether that growth was literal or slightly exaggerated, but the statement itself suggests that he endured profound changes while in bondage. Furthermore, a quarter of a century in a foreign land, subjected to oppression and limited freedom, would have irreversibly shaped his physical health and mental resilience. Eventually, in the 1660s, an English expedition managed to rescue him, returning him to his homeland. Yet by then, England itself had transformed beyond recognition. King Charles I, the monarch under whose reign Hudson had first risen to prominence, was long gone, executed after the English Civil War. In his place stood Charles II, the merry monarch, who had little reason to remember or reward the Queen's dwarf from decades past. Even Queen Henrietta Maria, once Hudson's greatest advocate, had died around the time he arrived back on English shores, removing any last tie he might have had to the royal circle. Hudson's re-entry into England might have felt more like a nightmare than a homecoming. He had left as a recognized if somewhat controversial figure, captain of horse, a companion to the royal family, a man with enough renown to draw the Queen's personal intervention when he was sentenced to banishment in France. But now, he was just another returnee with a Catholic background in a deeply suspicious environment. By the mid to late 1670s, political turbulence consumed London. Rumors of Catholic plots swirled in taverns and court chambers alike, stoked by conspiracy theories that Catholics aimed to assassinate King Charles II or overthrow the realm. It was in this charged atmosphere that Hudson, a known Roman Catholic connected to Henrietta Maria's old household, found himself under immediate scrutiny. Any illusions of receiving a hero's welcome or a comfortable pension vanished quickly. Instead, he was arrested and spent roughly 4 years locked away, a cruel twist for someone who had already endured 25 years of enslavement. No documents elaborate on the specifics of his prison conditions, but given that incarceration in 17th-century England was far from humane, it's safe to assume his health and spirit further deteriorated during this time. He emerged older, weakened, and stripped of the social standing he once possessed. The monarchy he had risked his life to serve offered him no safety net. Whether it was simply due to the swirling anti-Catholic paranoia or because no one at court remembered him, Hudson's final attempts to secure favor fell on deaf ears. In 1681, King Charles II authorized a small payment to Hudson, though the exact details remain murky. Some suppose it might have been a modest one-time sum rather than an ongoing pension. This meager gesture highlights the paradox of Hudson's life. Here was a man whose exploits, from riding in custom velvet saddles alongside the Queen to brandishing weapons in her defense, once fascinated entire royal circles. Yet in the end, he could only garner a meager payout and a few lines of mention in passing records. As for the precise circumstances of his death, history leaves us with more questions than answers. We don't know the date he passed away, how he spent his final days, or where he was buried. In fact, the total lack of documentation around his death underscores how thoroughly he had slipped through the cracks. One theory suggests he spent his last days in conditions so impoverished that no official record was ever made of his burial. Another possibility is that local parish records were lost or never created in the first place. Regardless, what emerges is a poignant image. Jeffrey Hudson died, to quote the records, like a common pauper, in stark contrast to the life of spectacle and relative luxury he had once enjoyed. This humbling end serves as a testament to the volatility of royal favor. In a royal court, one could go from cherished curiosity and companion of the highest in the land to being utterly disregarded, especially if the political or religious climate turned hostile. Hudson's Catholic faith, once a curious quirk that Queen Henrietta Maria was willing to overlook or even share, became a liability under Charles II's reign, when fear of Catholic plots ran rampant. Yet if Hudson's death was unremarkable in an official capacity, his posthumous legacy took on an unexpected life of its own. The same society that condemned him to obscurity became fascinated by his story. We see it in the paintings that captured him alongside Queen Henrietta Maria and her pet monkey, in the quips of poets who found his tiny stature an endless source of puns, and even in the 21st century, when a pair of his trousers fetched a hefty sum at auction. Across England, pub names like The Dwarf and The Giant pay homage to his friendship with William Evans, the 7-foot porter, an enduring reminder of their humorous double act. These nods suggest that although the monarchy discarded him in his lifetime, cultural memory held him in curious regard. If there's a silver lining to this tale, it's that history eventually recognizes figures like Jeffrey Hudson. While he never received a state funeral, a grand tomb, or even basic documentation, his story remains deeply compelling. The same empire that once dismissed him as a trivial footnote now immortalizes him in paintings, legends, and yes, anecdotes about an 18-inch man who rose to stand, quite literally, at the Queen's side, then traversed seas, fought in a civil war, survived enslavement, and witnessed the monarchy transform around him. In the context of 17th-century England, almost everyone was subject to dramatic swings of fortune, from courtiers who lost property in a civil war, to noble families exiled, to entire communities suffering religious persecution. But Jeffrey Hudson's life exemplifies these extremes more than most. He began as a poverty-stricken child in the Duke of Buckingham's household, soared to the lavish heights of Queen Henrietta Maria's court, then plummeted into enslavement for 25 years, only to languish in prison back home and die in obscurity. It's a cautionary tale about the fragility of status and the harsh judgment society can impose on those who fall outside its norms, be those norms religious, social, or physical. And so, while the official record remains silent on how and where Hudson drew his final breath, his overall journey resonates like few others. He stands as a figure who not only witnessed but actively participated in the pivotal moments of the 17th century, the English Civil War, the shifting of religious and cultural tides, and the broader currents of European conflict and exploration. The very silence around his death contrasts sharply with his once loud presence in the royal courts. In that disconnect lies the lasting significance of Jeffrey Hudson's story. His is a reminder that even those who seem destined for footnotes in history books can hold tremendous insight into an era. Through Jeffrey Hudson's final, quiet passing, we glimpse the broader unpredictability of a world in the throes of war and conspiracy, a world quick to abandon once beloved figures in favor of new passions and new fears. And that wraps up the incredible story of Jeffrey Hudson. From his early days of unexpected fame to his trials at sea, his daring exploits in war, and the tragic turn of events that led to years in captivity, Hudson's life was anything but ordinary. We hope his tale reminds you of the unseen influences one person can have on history, no matter their stature. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more remarkable stories from the past.